Welcome to Personal Finance Reimagined. Every month, we bring you a new way to think about personal finance and decision making tailored to life's most important moments. Through our unique belief and behavior based approach, we help you unlock the power of consistent, confident decision making for a lifetime of wealth and health. I'm Jeff Hulett, founder of Personal Finance Reimagined, your guide for today's discussion. My passion lies in helping individuals and organizations make smarter, more empowering financial decisions. It's an honor to share these strategies and insights that can make a real difference in your life. April is dedicated to negotiation. Join us as we uncover how to think about negotiation and practical tips to grow your negotiation success. So today I have the pleasure of welcoming my good friend and former KPMG colleague, Edmund Green. Edmund is a leader in risk management and business strategy, and he's the founder and CEO of Parlinum Consulting. Parlinum helps middle market corporations navigate risk management, business development, and international market entry. During our time together at KPMG, we shared many clients and worked side by side in the professional services marketplace. Edmund has always been a force of nature when it comes to negotiations. His ability to blend deep expertise with honesty and strategic thinking is always something I've really admired. Negotiation is at the heart of what we do in professional services, whether it's winning new business, structuring deals, or working with our clients to achieve the best outcomes. Today, we're going to unpack Edmund's approach to negotiation and explore the lessons he's learned throughout his impressive career. So welcome, Edmund.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate the time and looking forward to the discussion today.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks so much, Edmund. And it's funny. I've been reflecting on our time together at KPMG. So Edmund and I both worked in the Tyson's office for a while. For a little while, we actually, as I recall, had an office literally with walls, that basically were right next to each other. So it's really, really wonderful to reconnect with you. So Edmund, I want to start with a story, and this story is now kind of like lore, I think, at KPMG, or certainly has just made a big impression on me. So I remember when you were leading a competitive bid for an enterprise risk management solution at KPMG. It was with a really big client. Now, during the orals, the client asked whether our solution would work if not everyone in senior management was on board. So instead of just selling them on it, you told them not to buy it until their cultural house was in order. That kind of honesty almost cost you the deal, probably, I'm imagining, and maybe even your job. But in the end, it won KPMG that business. So tell us a little bit about that. What was going through your mind then, and what does that say about the role of trust in negotiation?
Yeah, no, I distinctly remember that event, and as you said, we were at orals. We were down selected. It was between KPMG and the incumbent and the chief legal counsel, who was the sponsor for the project. He asked a question. He said, what does it take in order for this work to be successful? And what I said to him is, you have to have board and senior levels, senior executive, not just involvement, but visible commitment to this effort. And that if you didn't do that, if you weren't able to bring that level of commitment to the effort, then it's not worth spending the money. Don't spend the money on KPMG. Don't spend the money on our competitor. Don't spend the money on anybody, because it's never going to work. So to your point, I just told him the truth. Because
Right.
in my experience, what I'd seen is that when organizations have that level of support, involvement, and commitment, then not just for ERM, but for any strategic initiative, the support, involvement, and commitment of the board and senior management is critical to the success of any sort of transformational kind of initiative along those lines. And I believe telling them the truth, which is what I've always done with my clients, is the way to go. And so, and even to this day, I mean, I've left KPMG about a year ago, and I still have KPMG clients calling me saying, "Hey, Edmund, I know you're not at KPMG anymore, but you know, um, can
Right.
you help us with X or Y or Z, or do you know someone?" The other thing that I do that's kind of counterintuitive is I build trust with my clients by making the work about them. What I like to say is I always sell the work from the other side of the table. And what I mean by that is if you build a trusted relationship with a client, you don't have to worry about selling. The work sells itself because the client will know that you have their best interest at heart. And so the way that I would approach the market is I always establish that foundation of trust by saying to them, listen, my job at KPMG is to bring you the absolute best and brightest in the world if they reside at KPMG, and to have them to face off against whatever problem you're presenting to me. And I will also tell you that if KPMG doesn't have the best and the brightest in the world to face off against your problem, I will come back and tell you that. And I will help you find someone who is the best and brightest in the world, even if that person is working for one of our competitors. I maintain relationships with our competitors. I don't have anything against our competitors. Those guys are great. Okay. But the point is, you have to make it about the client, you
Hmm.
see? And so that's kind of the foundation of my of my negotiation strategy, which is make it about the client first, tell them the truth, build that foundation of trust. If you have it, tell them that you have it. If you don't have it, tell them that too.
Right. Right. Well, I do want to ask you though, back to that specific case, and so what's going on in my mind when I think back to that is, as much as I, you know, think the world of KPMG, I could imagine that when you said that, there might have been a lead partner or somebody on the pursuit team, perhaps like a relationship manager type, that lost their collective, you know what.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I was just
Oh,
curious,
the
like how did you even like to tell them not to buy something? How did you manage that internally? Like was that a thing?
it wasn't a thing because they hired us. Now,
Right.
if we had lost the work, then it would have been a thing, but I wasn't concerned about that. Even if we
Right.
lost the work, I wasn't concerned about that
Okay.
because, by then I had already developed a reputation for producing results. And you're absolutely right. So I had the OMP for the Baltimore office sitting next to me. I had my team. We were all sitting on one side of the table, and then you had the client and all their executives sitting on the other side of the table. And they looked at me like, who tells a client to keep the money? But I told them the truth, right?
Right.
And I
Right.
think they hired us because I told them the truth. And then, of
I
course, we went on to build a weapons grade program for them from scratch for ERM.
right. Right.
And to this day, that program is, not only is it, kind of like a gold standard program, but it's been hugely, hugely, hugely beneficial and accretive to their business, which was the point that I was making. Is that if
Right.
you make the work just about doing ERM
Right.
and it's not adding value to the business, then those programs typically tend to just fall off because the board and senior managers just don't see the value in it. We're spending money;
Right.
it's not adding value. So, why are we spending the money?
Right.
So that was the other part.
Now that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's it's an interesting challenge. So from my perspective, I've been on the client side much longer than I was on the professional services, right? I was in banking and leadership and banking for 20 plus years before I joined KPMG. So I kind of went to the other side of buying consulting services to selling them. But what I remember as a buyer, if somebody had to come to, so there's really two things for me as a buyer. One is, do we really need it? Right. So that was a lot of times I was still trying to figure out if we really needed this or not. But once I got past, do we really need it? I could imagine hearing from somebody like you being honest and just completely disarming me. And once I figured out that I wanted to, to buy it, wanting to buy it from somebody who was that honest about, what I needed to do to make sure I got maximum value from the spend. That just would have made me feel so much better. So I could imagine that well, I don't know who the specifics of that case, but I could imagine that would have made all the difference in the world. So
Well,
that's pretty
absolutely.
cool.
Well, I was raised in the banking world, relationship banking world, and did a lot of most of my clients were in middle market, and that's where I kind of cut my teeth and got very well grounded in this whole notion of consultative selling.
Right.
And with consultative selling, it's aimed at getting at the question that you just raised, which is, do we really need it? So
Right.
oftentimes clients will come to you and they'll say, I call it like order taking, right? Um, and an order taking response would be the client comes and says, um, we need a Big Mac, a large order of fries, and a medium Coke. And then the non-consultative approach would be go back to KPMG and say, the client said they need a Big Mac, a large order of fries, and a medium Coke. Let's start cooking.
Yeah.
And what I say is, well, wait a minute. Why are you asking for that? Help me understand your dietary needs, your dietary restrictions.
Right.
You got to get underneath why are they asking you the question? So if we stick with ERM, for example, I know for a fact that nobody just wakes up one day and says, oh, I think we need an ERM program. The
Right.
question I always ask them is, why are you asking about ERM? Why do you think you need ERM? And then
Right.
they tell me. Sometimes they'll say, oh, we need it for regulatory compliance. Sometimes they'll say, oh, one of our board members asked about it. Sometimes they'll
Right.
say, well, we got a new CEO and he or she had ERM at their previous company and now they want to implement it here. You have to get underneath the issue in order to understand the problem that you're trying to solve.
Right.
Because the solution that you come up with depends on how you frame the problem.
Right. Right.
You see?
Yeah.
And
No, I love
so
that.
yeah, yeah. And so if you frame going back to the Big Mac, if you frame the problem as a hunger problem, right, then you satisfy the problem by giving them something to eat. Whereas if you frame the problem as a nutrition issue, then you have a totally different conversation.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Well, I want to go back to one thing you mentioned that struck a chord with me. So you talked about getting the best in the world, right? And I remember a story. So I used to do work, sell work to the federal government when I was at KPMG, since we were in the DC area. It made a lot of sense. But I can remember working with a very senior client, director level at one of the agencies that basically came to me and said, in one of our competitors, there was a person that they loved to work with who thought that they were one of the best at what they did that they have ever seen. And I was like, really? So, so they're telling me about this person and everything. I said, okay, thank you for telling me. Basically, I went back to our leadership, ended up making that person an offer, promoting them, and then basically bringing them in. It was sort of the same idea. If they're saying that they're the best and the brightest, and I don't know that at the time where they were kind of hadn't been promoted perhaps as quickly. It's kind of the way all firms operate. Sometimes they don't always recognize people the way they should. So I was just like, well, dang. I mean, that was the greatest tell ever. Basically, it was almost like they were saying to me, "If you get this person on board, I will buy more stuff from you." It's like,
sure.
okay, all right,
Absolutely.
I can do that,
Absolutely.
or at least I
Yeah,
can try to
yeah,
do it. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, no, you're a couple things that I wanted to highlight in this discussion that are some, kind of foundational principles that I live by. And number one is you have to be present,
right,
especially in this day and age where, people are not either spending time together or maybe they don't value time together and they're on the phones and that sort of thing. There's no substitute for, here's an SAT word, there's no substitute for propinquity, which is being present. Okay. And if that means getting on a plane and going and spending time with the client, even before they have something that you can sell to them, you have to spend time getting to know them. That the negotiation, if we're talking about negotiation, starts long before you're in the negotiation. So you have to
right,
spend time getting to know them, having them get to know you. The other piece is and you touched on this a little bit as well, is just being yourself. You have to be your authentic self. And one of the stories I like to tell is, years ago when I was in banking, I went through this credit training program, 2 year long apprenticeship program, and then they assign a territory to you. And I remember having a conversation with one of my mentors, a guy named Charlie Connolly, and I said to Charlie, I was like, Charlie, like what do you have to do to be successful, in this business? You've been doing this for 30 years or so. And he looked at me and he says, you got to be yourself. Don't try to be anybody else. Just be yourself, and that's more than sufficient. So fast forward, I was assigned a territory in Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania, and the guy who was retiring, a guy named Jim Miller, he took me out and introduced me to one of his clients, a guy named Jack Fatika. Jack was a CEO of a company called Champion Bolt in Erie, Pennsylvania. So we sit down, we're in Fatika's office, and Fatika says to me, he says, "Well, I don't know if you got some big shoes to fill over here with Jim Miller, And I looked at Fatika and I said, "Well, here's what I would tell you." I said, "I'm going to be a very, very poor Jim Miller, but I'll be one hell of an Edmund Green." And,
You probably
and
like
at that,
that.
yeah, he did. So from that point on, Jack and I, we were like great friends, because he thought I
Yeah,
was going to come in and say, "Well, I'm just like Jim Miller too, and we wear the same kind of shoes, and no,
right,
you have to be yourself. I can't be Jim Miller, but I can be one hell of an Edmund Green." And
right.
so Jack and I, we became good friends. Even I was his banker. He would invite me to stay at his home and that sort of thing, and off we go. So I
I
like
love
to I
that.
like to tell that story as well. And so we already talked about being honest, right? Tell them the truth, right? And it's not just truth, it's trustworthiness. Trustworthiness is a function of honesty, competence, and reliability. Okay. And so those are the foundational elements of a trusted relationship. And then, of course, the last piece is you got to be empathetic, which means you got to be willing to see the world from the perspective of the other
Right,
person on the other side of the table that you're, quote, negotiating with. So
right.
those are kind of the, you know, 4 or 5 principles that anchor my approach to the market, and from for negotiation. And I
Right,
think that if you go into the work in that way and recognize too that trust is the foundation for all of it. I say it
right,
all the time. If the person on the other side of the table is not someone that you can trust, then don't do the deal,
right.
because there's no amount of lawyering and papering and agreements and
Yeah,
contracts that can protect you
won't
from
matter.
someone who's not trustworthy.
Right.
So as soon as if I'm in a situation and I'm dealing with someone and they display um, aspects of their character that reflect a lack of trustworthiness, I walk away from those deals, even if
Right,
there's money on the table,
right.
because you pay for it down the road. Even if you win the work, you end up paying for it down the road. It's a Pyrrhic victory, as they say.
Well, it's interesting. It's just something you just said, Edmund, that just really piqued something in my brain, which I feel like is different now than it used to be. But from my experience is that, like let's say in professional services, you do a statement of work, you've got a set of things you're going to do, you have timing expectations, you have deliverables, you have all that stuff, right? And and as much as you want to execute perfectly against those things, we all know one of the reasons that clients bring you in is because the S is hitting the fan and you don't know everything that's going on. So you get in there and you figure stuff out and you start adapting and doing and things that you have to do to be successful. My point in bringing this up is, being perfect against, say, a contract has never really been you know, has never been my complete driver. What I've always been a big fan of is, look, life happens. The most important thing you can do is set expectations, hit expectations, but if you can't, be very clear and communicate about what's going on, what the options are, and how to get as good as you can, as close to as you can, to hitting the expectations in the time frame needed. And I feel like today that doesn't seem, I don't know why, it just seems like being open and honest and communicating about when things don't work. I feel like sometimes people shy away more from that today. And I don't know why,
Yeah.
honestly,
Yeah.
because to me, it's not about being perfect. It's about communicating and being really clear with people when things aren't being perfect, which they almost
Yeah.
never are.
Yeah. No,
So,
you're absolutely right. And I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the paper. People tend to equate negotiation with a contract.
right.
And what I always say that is that if you are in a position when something goes wrong, if your fallback position is that contract, you're already losing.
Yeah, you're in big
The
trouble.
fallback position should be the relationship. The
Right.
contract, assuming that you've gone through and you've put a deal
Right.
together that protects all the parties in a way that they should be protected. The contract should be the last thing you have to go back to in order to work through difficulties when a project goes bad. If you get
Right.
to the point where you're pointing to clause number 3.1 and
Right.
4.2,
You're
you're
screwed.
all you're screwed. Let's be
Yeah, no,
clear.
I'm with you. And it's funny you mentioned that because that's always been my thing. I've never gone back to look at a contract
Yeah.
ever. I mean, we spend so much time up front with them, but at the end of the day, it's getting it done, I guess,
Yeah.
is the way I've kind
Yeah.
of looked at it. So let
Yeah.
me let me just shift gears just a little bit. And I'm really curious about this. Edmund, of course, you were with decades at KPMG. KPMG, Big Four, very large firm in the marketplace. So you've worked with and sold to very large companies from a very large company organization in KPMG. Now you're with your own company. It's a small company. So I'm just
Mhm.
curious, like, has your approach or have you had to tailor the way you negotiate, even if not from a conceptual standpoint, just from a practical standpoint of being a smaller company and perhaps working with smaller clients?
Well, I think I've had to kind of, you know, do some nips and tucks around the edges, but fundamentally, I approach the work that I'm doing for middle market companies in the same way that I approach the work with large organizations. The biggest difference is the proximity to the decision making authority in an organization. Okay. And so, like, if you're talking to a middle market company, oftentimes you're talking to the founder, owner, and people at
Right,
that level, and we were accustomed to doing that at KPMG. Oftentimes we're engaging with the board and senior management and that sort of thing. But the difference is that in a larger organization, there are multiple equities, if you will, that have to be considered before a decision is made. So the sales cycle can tend to be a little bit longer. Whereas in middle market, you're talking to a decision maker, you know,
right,
and so that's one of the biggest differences. But I still bring the same level of quality. In fact, that's one of my selling points in the marketplace is that you can get a KPMG level resource, and in fact, many of the people that are on my team are ex KPMG, PwC. I mean, they're
right.
big four folks, but we're able to deliver that level of quality, that level of value at a different price point. I'm not going to say lower because in some cases we're not lower, but
Right,
at a different price point. But you're going to get a much more focused, higher quality results in some
right.
cases because of the level of attention that we're
Yeah.
able to provide to you on a personal basis.
I'm guessing, and this is what I found working for a smaller company for myself at least. Um, I can only take on but so many clients. But that's because I want to give them the level of attention that I used to have to offload to a director or to a manager or whatever. And I like working directly with the clients, you know.
Yes,
So it's
that's
kind of
right.
it's some level, at KPMG, you had your numbers. You just it's kind of like being a doctor in today's society. You spend 5 minutes with every patient, and then the insurance company tells you got to go on to the next one.
Yes.
And sometimes it feels a little bit like that at KPMG. Not
Yeah.
taking anything away from KPMG, but my experience was I didn't necessarily get to spend the amount of quality time that I wanted to with each client. So now I have less clients,
Yep.
but I feel like I'm spending more quality time. And honestly, personally, I'm enjoying it a lot more. So
Absolutely.
anyway,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I did have a little bit of a different question, and this is kind of related back to KPMG, but some of the people that are watching this interview are people in large consulting firms, right? And so just to kind of put this out there, when I was at KPMG, I'm not sure what was harder in the negotiation, negotiating with the client or negotiating with KPMG. And sometimes I felt like there were three parties in the negotiation: the deliverer, KPMG risk management, and the client.
Yeah.
We all had different incentives, and it was just sort of me in the middle trying to sort it all out and
That's right.
making everybody happy. So I guess the question, and there is a question in this, is if when you were negotiating internally, whether it was
Hmm.
resources, pricing, working firm politics, risk management, etc., what were some of the key things that you did internally focused to make your life better and also to help you to be more successful with your clients?
Well, I actually embraced the KPMG risk management people because I kind of likened those folks to when I was in banking. We had a senior credit officer, and I was raised in a very strong credit culture. And one of the things that we were taught is, the greater sin. It wasn't a sin for a deal to go bad. If you made a bad loan, the greater sin was to, first of all, not being able to see it happening or before it actually occurred, and not taking proactive steps to get the team involved before the thing actually started to go down. And
Right.
so I would approach the risk management people the same way because I saw them as an asset. Going back to the contract piece, that is what they. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a risk management person, but I saw them as the ones whose job was to sort of help protect us in that way. Um,
Hmm.
from the issue that could emerge when things go bad. Just like if a
Right.
loan went bad, you want to make sure you have the right clauses in there. But I always try to be very upfront with all of the warts and issues and hair on the deal and questions that they would ask. I would get all that stuff out on the table, and that taking that approach actually made me a better consultant and a better relationship manager because I was
Right.
then able to go back and have a more meaningful, direct conversation with the client about what we could and couldn't do. So it kind of
Right.
goes back to that earlier statement about being honest and upfront and understanding the world from their perspective and knowing that if they came to me and said, "Hey, we want to do X, Y, and Z," if I had that kind of risk management lens that I was applying to that, and that's not to say that I wouldn't challenge it, but at least
Right.
I would take the time to understand the true dimensions of the risks so that I was able to go back and explain it to our internal folks. Here are all the risks, okay? And I'm able to articulate that. And I need you to help me to get this deal done because your job is not to say no. Your job is to protect the firm and to help us to figure out how to structure something so we can get it across the finish line.
Right.
So that's how it worked for me, and as a result, I think I was able to produce pretty good results, in that by taking that approach.
Yeah. No, you absolutely did. Sounds like you
Mhm.
were probably had a better relationship with risk management than I did, but
Yeah, yeah,
it's probably because of who you are. So
yeah.
that's good. That's good.
Well, and then
Well,
and then the other thing I would do is I spent a lot of time, and you know this about me. I spent a lot of time in the wilderness, as I like to say, and that is going to places where nobody else wanted to go and doing things that
right.
nobody else wanted to do. And so a lot of the deals that I would bring in were, sometimes they were unconventional. And so
Right.
it required, and I like that part. I like the fact that it hadn't been done before. And so
Right.
we engage and we wrestle the, 800-pound gorilla to the ground and figure it out. To me, that's what made the work fun. It wasn't like
Yeah.
going in and doing a, straight internal audit with the same terms
Right.
and conditions and all the rest of it, and you
Yeah.
can just check the box. A
Right.
lot of the deals that I did were, you know,
Yeah.
were um,
We're like puzzles.
um, were like
It
puzzles.
sounds like.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and that
That's
made it
cool.
fun for me.
Good. Well, Edmund, this has been a lot of fun, and this brings back so many memories for me. So thanks for coming along for
Yeah,
the
man.
ride. And I do have a kind of a wrap up question though. And again, folks that are listening in, I always like to end up with, you're going to have a little bit more junior people. Maybe they're in the management ranks, they're looking to become a more senior consultant, or become a MD or partner or what have you. But like, do you have any advice? Like if there were three things, or pick your number, but let's say three things around negotiation skills that they should really focus on or learn and get down to be successful. What kind of advice would you give a more junior person?
So one piece of advice would be that the negotiation starts with hello. Okay. So when you meet someone, that's when it starts. It starts with building that relationship that on a foundation of trust. Okay. The other thing is, if let's just say you get into a competitive situation and you don't win, don't just take your marbles and go home. Okay. You thank that client for the choice and decision that they made, and then you make yourself available to them so that in the event that they need something in the future, or if the choice that they made doesn't work out, make sure that they know that they can always call you, to help deal with that situation in the event that they end up with buyer's remorse and so on. And I have numerous examples of that where I brought folks in and they worked on something for 18 months and then they didn't win. And their initial response was to kind of get upset about it. And I said, no, 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 don't get upset. You go back to that client, you tell them, you thank them for the opportunity to be considered, and then you stay engaged with them, and you become sort of like a stalking horse with that competitor, so that if they stumble or they fall, you want to be
Right.
there to say, hey, those guys are good. I have nothing to say about my bad to say about my competitors, but let me know if there's
Yeah.
some way we can help you with the situation. And so that's the other piece of advice. And then the other piece is just always be yourself. You can't you can't you
Love that.
can't be anybody else. Just be you. Okay. And because that's who's going to show up no matter what eventually anyway. So you might as well start out with who you are, because that's always who's
Right.
going to show up. Those would be my pieces of advice.
Well, thank you, Edmund. And with that finish, I will say, and this is the unique and only Edmund Green. Edmund is a
Well,
leader in risk management and business consulting. He's the founder and CEO of Parlinum Consulting, and Parlinum helps middle market corporations navigate risk management, business development, and international market entry. My name is Jeff Hulett, founder and president of Personal Finance Reimagined. I hope you enjoyed our talk. Please check us out at financerevamp.com, and you can check us out on socials. But thank you so much, Edmund, for being here, and we will talk soon.
thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you. I enjoyed the talk.